Hello, good morning, and welcome to another episode of What Do We Do Now? A conversation about the live events industry and what happens next. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by an executive producer. Say hello, Ben Hawkins.
Hi, good morning, Dave. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Morning, Ben. And where are you joining us from today? Whereabouts are you based?
I presently live in Boston, Mass, in on the east coast of America, near the epicenter of the COVID epidemic now.
Wow, and how long have you been based out there?
Moved out here in March 2017, so just over 3 years. Yeah.
Fabulous. And just tell us a little bit about your history. How did you
Yeah,
get
sure.
into the industry and sort of what route did you come through?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so look, I started. It's always been about hearts and minds for me. It's all been about communication, one way or another. And um, early on, as a teenager, I got really interested in medieval history and didn't, with absolutely no career plans whatsoever. Just wanted to follow my heart really and just carry on studying the Vikings and things like that. But actually, that very rapidly took me into art history, which I studied with medieval history at university. But at the same time, got really heavily involved in theatre at Glasgow University and spent a lot of time running the local theatre group and producing shows and taking shows to the Festival Fringe. And that's what I sort of kind of neglected my degree to do more of, and then what moved straight into theatre and was, delighted to get some great work as soon as I came out of the gate, having graduated. I did graduate, which is good. The key thing is that I started working in events at the same time as I was working in theatre, just sort of helping out local councils and stuff like that, and working on some big shows because I worked in Cardiff and worked on things like the Big Weekend back in the late 90s, and
Very cool, very
and
cool.
yeah, very cool actually, and worked on sort of side projects that went around with the Rugby World Cup and things like that. And that was a phenomenal exposure. And then in 2000, after the sort of new year, the new millennium stuff, I sort of moved over formally into corporate events. And have always been involved, from a technical point of view, sort of came up through the technical designing side of things, but also always listening in those conferences, always listening to what everybody's saying and actually thinking very carefully about how they could do it better. And as a result, I've sort of become a sort of self-educated content producer as well, a creative producer. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, really. And I've been at George B. Johnson for 16, 17 years now. Yeah.
Wow, true lifer. And so just tell me a little bit about what you mean by content. I'm a
Yeah,
production
sure.
manager, so painfully, I kind of don't really get too involved in the content other than making sure that the content is technically facilitating the content you're
Exactly.
trying to get across. But
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about what you mean when you say content producer.
Yeah. It's really important to define content. And I've actually spent a lot of time over the years trying to do just that. And what I've settled on is the following definition. And it really comes from that point that often people say when you talk about, let's talk about content, and everyone goes, content is king. And you're like, yeah, but you so rapidly forget the king, don't you? You so rapidly forget the content. So I actually started Googling what content is king, and I actually discovered that Bill Gates actually famously said it back in 96. He also went on to say some really, really prescient and useful things. He talked about the TV industry, and he said, the people that look to win from the TV industry were the manufacturers of TV sets. But he then goes on to say, when he made this remark in 96, but the long-term winners of the TV explosion were the creators and providers of information and entertainment. While he, in 96, was frankly envisaging the coming of Netflix and Amazon Prime and these other creators of content, regardless of format, he also was giving us a definition of content, which is information and content. Information and entertainment. What I mean by that is that let's not worry about what the format is, whether it's a letter, a podcast, a radio program, a scribed script, whatever. There's a laundry list you could get into. And that's the problem when you're defining content. Don't do the laundry list. Just describe it in terms of a spectrum that is either informative or entertaining, and ideally both. And those are that gives you the two core principles you need to focus on when you're dealing with content, which is, are you creating something that's informative? And is it actually engaging or entertaining to keep people interested? And that's what I mean when I say content.
Perfect. So, um, I guess given the current situation,
Yeah.
people's lives are changing hugely at the
Hmm.
moment. People
Hmm.
are trying to come up with new ways of working. I suppose what you're saying about content being the core of anyone's message is still kind of universally true.
Yeah.
But what would you say has had the biggest impact on your working life since the pandemic has sort of really spread everywhere and you've gone under lockdown? Like, yeah, what's had
Yeah,
the
sure.
biggest impact there?
Well, I mean, the trite answer is people's bandwidth at home. That's
Yeah, so
actually the
true.
thing that is
So true.
I mean, it's fundamentally defining how effective we can be with the technology we're using to enable them to get their stories out. But that's actually the key thing. What's really changed, or not changed, but become, really sort of come into crystal focus, is the importance of content in what we do. Because the with this, I'm going to use the P word. I thought I wouldn't, but I'm going to do it. You're all going to have to drink, because I'm about to say pivot, because we all pivoted from the physical to the digital. Um, what's happened there is that everything that we've typically done in the physical event, the things that have got, given people specific focus in their areas, that's all fallen away. But the one thing that has remained, as you quite rightly just said, is the main reason for doing the event. And I've always maintained that the key and primary focus of any experience that you create, regardless of the format or the means of the media, is whatever it is that you're using to connect your intentions, your business goals with your audience. And if you don't worry about that connective tissue, that thing that joins your business intentions and your audience, then, and which, by the way, is, in my view, is the content, um, then there's no point doing your event. So I've always talked about this concept of content first. Think about content first. Think about what you're trying to communicate first, and then the medium, the way that you present it will follow. And there's a bunch of simple principles that can govern that as well. But for me, that focus on content it's almost got to a point where it's not just content first now, it's content only. And in the conversations I've been having with clients, we've got to a point where we've said, there's been a conversation about the platform. There's been a conversation about, well, who needs to speak? And I said, and I've come into the conversation and said, okay, we can answer all of those questions. But first of all, we need to have a dialogue around what are your most important messages that you need to get out? How does your organization demonstrate leadership in this time? And if we can draft just a simple treatment in the same way you would put a treatment together for video, and by the way, that's just words written down on a page. Once we've got that, then everybody else has got something to work around, and we can start identifying who your speakers are. We can start identifying what locations we need to go to. And I've often used the analogy of a movie, because if you ask someone, what do you need when you want to create a movie? When does the movie start to be a movie? Well, it starts to be a movie when you have a script to go and approach a producer, to go and approach a studio, to use to cast actors. Before that point, it is just an idea in somebody's head. And you do not start with a location. You do not start, well, with an actor, but the actor has to become the producer or the script writer in order to own it. My point is that you need to have a written down document, albeit as brief as it needs to, albeit brief, around which people can coalesce. And that is the content, the description of the content. And
Brilliant.
that's been extremely helpful to our clients to kind of get something to focus on and give them purpose in this time.
Perfect. So content is king, and actually creating that content in a straightforward, written down form that clearly
Mm.
explains what that piece of communication
Mhm.
is. And I suppose one of the things about us and what we love about working in events is
Mm.
that there's kind of that experiential piece. So there's that
Yeah.
sense of it being a shared experience of that content. Do you
Mhm,
think,
mhm.
or have you seen or heard of any interesting ways that people have been able to bring some of that sense of a shared experience or sense of networking is to want for want of a better phrase into this kind of new way of putting shows together essentially for an online audience? And actually, by the way, what do you call them? Do you call them virtual events? Do you call them online events, hybrid events, broadcasts? Like what's the term you use actually for what people are calling them now?
As far as I'm concerned, they're all interchangeable, and I think we're just going to call them experiences after a while, because in
Gotcha.
the same way that we don't really talk about e-commerce anymore, we just talk about
Yeah.
retail,
Yeah, yeah.
um, and the term virtual has connotations that are slightly different to digital, and
Sure.
online has a slightly different connotation to. But to be honest with you,
So connected
frankly, thank goodness there
experiences.
are so many words for it. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
any
cool.
experience is connected, because if it's singular, then essentially you're just on your own in your room, which is fine if you like
So
that
I
sort of thing.
suppose, but that's exactly it, right? So the content, if it's a shared experience, can often be
Mm,
more impactful.
precisely.
So that connected part of the
Mm,
experience is really, really key. So
mhm. How do we make
with
that
every,
work?
yeah, how do we make that happen? Everyone's alone in their room, like you just described.
Sure. So there's a couple of things that we do. I mean, here I am talking to you sitting down, okay, and that's great. One of the first things that we do is we 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 really encourage all of our presenters, everyone, to actually stand up and do something slightly different. In the same way
Great.
that when I'm
Just show me,
coaching
show me that, show me
speakers,
that. Do it, do
sure.
it. Oh, there we
In
go.
there
Switch
we go.
cameras,
And
switch cameras. Very
yeah,
clever. How
switch
did you do that?
cameras. And well, there's a couple of bits of kit that I
It's a magic.
downloaded. Found this great bloke online who gave me some tips
Cool.
on a YouTube video. Can you hear me all right? You see me
Yeah,
all right?
still sounds good. Still sounds good.
Good,
Maybe bring the
excellent.
mic a little bit closer. Let's see that mic,
Will
please.
do. I just don't want to. Oh, you want to see the mic in the shot? I don't know if I
Well,
can. I might just undo the zoom out the camera a little.
that's
No, that's
going in.
zooming it in.
There you
There
go.
we go.
So you are using a real mic, not just the headset there, then. That's
I am. I've
interesting.
got a nice.
And
I'll just take it
why is that?
down.
Is that something that you're talking to your clients about, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, I can talk to you about that. I'll answer the first question though,
Sorry,
which is, how
jumping
do we make
around.
this engaging to your audience? And then we'll get to the technical stuff as well, because no, it's all part of the mix. So how do we make it engaging? First of all, we take a leaf out of Radio Broadcast book, which is just think about talking to one member of the audience. I'm talking right now to you, Dave, and I'm looking right down the camera as if I'm talking to your eyes. And while that may sound a little bit Derren Brown, what I'm talking about is what I am
Brilliant.
talking
Look
about
into your
is
eyes.
look into my eyes, not around my eyes. No, but seriously,
The turtleneck does it so well as well,
thank you
actually.
so much. Well, hey, I'm on the East Coast. I can wear turtlenecks. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, listen. Yeah, look, it's about engagement. It's about making sure I'm talking to you as an individual, also conscious that many other people are listening, but I want them to feel like I'm talking to them personally as well. And that's the sort of rule of thumb of radio broadcasters as well. You're talking to thousands of individuals, and I think that's a really important way of focusing on digital. You're not in a room of 5,000, 50,000 arena or something like that, talking to audiences in that sort of gladiatorial setting. So it gives the opportunity for greater emotional proximity.
Yeah, can I just stick on that point for 1 second, actually? So,
Sure.
presumably in our line of work, an awful lot of the presenters that you would normally work with are actually coached to speak to those 5,000 people in that
Yeah, exactly.
larger stage setting. How are you
Uh-huh,
finding
uh-huh.
that there's sort of some new skills in a way you need to be coaching the presenters
Mm,
through as well?
precisely. Yeah, we absolutely are, and we really are asking them to access how they work when they're communicating to their internal audiences on Zoom. Fortunately, the best leaders have already had to sort of access their emotional sort of resources in a way that they haven't necessarily before in order to create empathy. Um, you got to think about it in these terms. The leaders that we're asking to sort of make those most important calls to their customers via this medium, through these experiences, have also probably had to have some really horrible and tough conversations with some of their company and some of their, they've had to furlough people, they've had to lay people off, they've had to make some, had to cut people's pay. And they've had to do that and access that all through this digital medium. So they've all had they've been through a hell of a boot camp already. And what we try to do is access that and say, now remember, you're not the only person that's experienced that, and everybody's on the same page with this. So just access that. And we've really, we've had one show, and I have to say the CEO of that in that show, he gave frankly an Oscar-winning performance, but it wasn't artifice, it wasn't fake, it was genuine, and it was so compelling and soulful, and frankly I got goosebumps for the first time in a long time in a professional setting, because of the way that this particular person communicated to his audience just through the lens, and that's just remarkable. And we as event professionals, regardless of whether we're directly focused on the storytelling like I am, or we're just providing the environment to function, the technology to support it, we all have a part to play in achieving that, because we've got to make everything as smooth and as easy and as comfortable for them so that they can do it and feel that they can expose themselves in that way and be vulnerable, because with that vulnerability comes authenticity, and with authenticity comes truth. And that's what we're trying to provide to
Brilliant.
people.
So in terms of that, some practical things. So
Yeah.
like how long are you still doing, like an 8-hour conference in the same sort of way, or like how
Good Lord,
long
no.
is your are the shows currently?
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. I mean, look, we so it's an interesting thing. We got a really good point of view on this. Look, everyone says you can't run these things for longer than 15-20 minutes, and you're right. That's a really good rule of thumb, taking what the general sort of principles from YouTube viewing is, which is 12 to 15 minutes if you're not particularly sort of an uninvested audience member, and then 45 minutes is fine. By the way, I got those stats not just from YouTube but from my kids as well. My kids, my 13-year-old's more than happy to watch a 45-minute YouTube video on dinosaurs, but frankly, when it comes to sort of stoichiometry or something like that, 15 is going to be just enough. Do you know what I mean? Because he's not particularly bothered about chemistry. But that's great.
What about live versus pre-recorded content? Do you sense any difference there?
Brilliant. So the first thing I was going to say about the content duration, that goes for the digital side of things before people were not able to go to physical events. So with physical events, people are prepared to get on a plane or get in a car and drive to a location. Well, they can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's reasonable to ask people in this digital only environment to actually view for longer, because guess what? They have the time. They don't. The reason for them not going to the venue is not theirs. It's global. Which means that you can presume
longer than what? Longer than the 15 or 20 minute kind of
longer
YouTube
than the
thing.
15 or 20.
Yeah, gotcha.
However, the caveat is the following: while you can presume to have a slightly longer session that may not be about material that is their first choice, you still have a responsibility to keep it engaging, because we are all conditioned to how we watch the digital format or TV. So while so what that means is that you can't just take someone standing on stage as a keynote and just assume that you can just have someone talking to camera in the same way. It's not just about the audience, it's about the pace and the change of the material. First of all, you've only got one screen to go down. Okay, you're not got someone on stage, and people aren't self-editing, right? They are not looking from the person when they're making an important point to the screen that's behind them. It's the job of the producer to create the production to do that. So that means that you need to be far more intentional about how you manage all of the content, including the live camera shots on that screen. And there's nothing worse than that little window at the top and the graphics, because that's just so dull and so meh when you're comparing it to live TV sports viewing, or you're comparing it to the news or an election special or something like that, where you've got whizzy graphics and everything. So first of all, all of us in this space need to raise our game to how we're producing what goes on in that little window. And by the way, that little window can be as small as an iPhone 5. Okay. You've got to be really focused on keeping it interesting. And the rules of thumb there are, don't have anybody talking to camera uh, for more than 3 minutes without cutting to something else that is either a video or a conversation or something like that. The other rule of thumb is, don't let anything happen on the screen without changing for more than 30 seconds. What I mean is, someone gets on screen, put a lower third up, keep talking, and then you suddenly put a side graphic, and there's a graphic over here, and stuff like that. You got to keep the furniture on the and the furniture on the screen moving around. Keep it all moving around, because you're going to keep people interested. And also, the other thing that's super important is, and you're just sort of asking me about this, is live versus pre-recorded. It's got to be live. And coming back to that earlier question of how do you engage the audience and bring them back in, it's got to be really, truly live, like we are right now, so that people can comment and you can bring that audience back in and have real-time feedback loop. Now, this is going to date me a little bit, but I have a singular point of view around social media. And I submit that Noel Edmonds' Breakfast Club, or whatever it was called. What was it called? The Noel Edmonds
House party?
the thing with Keith Chegwin. No, in the morning he
Oh,
had
before. Yeah. I know what you mean.
yeah, they had the breakfast show, and he had Keith Chegwin doing a toy swap thing, and he sent a live camera out to locations, and people would bring toys, and they just facilitate swapping toys around a live camera, and this is what Keith Chegwin did. But you get a lot of people just coming up on camera going, "Hi, Mum." That's social media in its rawest form. It's people using this global internet or global network to get a feedback loop and get humor out of it. And they're getting that moment of momentary fame. It's only their mum that recognizes them, but it's so cool. And we love that. And that's the
I
thing that you need
guess.
to access by doing live TV.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the sort of over generic, overused term for that is kind of user generated content. Like, is
Yeah,
exactly that. Like that's why
it,
YouTube is so successful, right? Because I can
it
just do
is.
this live on YouTube and see
Yeah,
myself and go, "Hi,
exactly.
mum."
It is, but it's about the real time aspect of it as well,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
you're
yeah,
getting that immediate feedback loop, and that
yeah,
makes everything feel real. And by the way, by having it in real time, you're creating an event. You're creating something that is time specific, because
yeah.
otherwise you're just creating a video that anybody can browse at video on demand. And this comes back to that point, is that you need to have aliveness to what you are doing. In
Yeah,
order to
yeah.
make it, you had to be there. That's why
And it's
people
like,
travel halfway around the world, to have to be there.
is peril like the sort of there's a little bit of threat, there's a little bit of risk there. Does that just
Yeah,
get a bit more out of your presenters? Like, do people kind of perform
yeah,
better under that sort of situation? Like,
definitely. I mean, I'm definitely at least 15% more animated, partly because of the coffee, and partly because it's live. And I know that there is someone out there going, "My God, he's a bit of a whatever." But that's fine. I like it. It's okay. I can deal with that. My skin's thick enough. But my point is, it's real, and things could go wrong, and you build contingency in for that. And by the way, you use a bit of artifice. You use a bit of, there are some conventions and some conceits you establish. It doesn't all have to be live.
hmm,
You listen to the radio, and I'm a devout listener to Radio 4. I don't have a religion, but I do have a sort of blind faith towards Radio 4. And I just want to say how amazing I think the BBC have been through this time.
hmm.
Um, Especially for somebody living out here on the east coast of America, where I still get my main news feed from the BBC, because it's far better than anything else out here. So my point here is, though, they don't have everything live, right? You listen to the radio, but a lot of it is packages that are pre-recorded. Even on the
Mm.
news programs, it's a pre-recorded journalistic package. And those are the rules of thumb that you use when you're putting on a show. Is you
So, so for
you you,
people
you
maybe that
Mhm.
don't have quite as much budget, because obviously doing everything
Sure.
live, especially under
Hmm.
current situation, we've come up with a lot of
Hmm.
alternative ways of remote
Sure.
working, and there's quite a lot
Sure.
of infrastructure that needs to go in, partly to manage that broadband
Hmm.
issue that you kind of mentioned as the biggest challenge at the moment. You
Hmm.
put in redundancies and
Hmm.
backups and all sorts. But is like for people that can't necessarily afford to put that in for every contributor, is this, how do you work out which bit needs to be live? Is
Sure.
it just the host, or is it panel sessions, or
Yeah.
is there any
So
sort of?
Yeah, definitely. That's such an easy one. So first of all, you can do the whole thing pre-recorded, but create the conceit that it's live. And in order to do, the absolute minimal sort of offering that you can have is two remote locations pre-recorded. Okay, and that's simply, you have a host who is going to record a bunch of segments to link all of your pieces, and you don't underpin it with any social media. You don't underpin it with anything that happens in real time. But at least what you're doing is creating someone talking directly to an audience and creating a direct engagement through the lens, through the mic, with that audience, and providing them orientation and providing them the guidance on how to best access all of the material that needs to be communicated by the organization of the event to the audience. And what I mean by that is, if you have somebody recording an opening 7-minute piece and they say, welcome, dun, 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 we're delighted to see you today, we're going to show you this, and this, and by the way, there's an amazing platform available with all this on, video on demand for you. Let's take a look at that now. You run a little 30 or 50 seconds sort of stinger that drives people to that. That's a little thing that you can pre-produce, and it's a sort of £5,000 or dollar video that you can put together with a nice voiceover. All of these little pockets of really high production value, but it can all be pre-recorded and put in the can and then sent out. And then you focus on producing one really solid point of view piece, visionary piece that you put a lot of decent production values into and production elements into, so that you're creating something that's really compelling to watch. And once you've done that, you've earned the right to show some crap as well, to show someone recording from home, or sort of the lower risk stuff that requires investment, because everybody gets it, and it means that you're not blowing all this money unnecessarily. So that's the minimum viable product from my point of view.
Ben, this is absolutely amazing. I think, like, we're running out of time a little bit, but like, if you were up for it at some point, it'd be amazing to get you back, maybe with a couple of other producers, just to bounce around some of these ideas a bit further. Like, I'd love to get you back and do a bit more. But just as we kind of come down to land, as we come into finish, like, what is the best piece of work advice you've ever been given in your career, or do you have anything like a particular message for the live events industry in this time?
Yeah, love it. So I've got an answer to both of those questions. The first one is really simple. A very great man, and I think it's okay to name him, a guy called Tim Hyman, who's an amazing production manager. We worked together in theatre, and I was a lowly scenic stage manager at the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff, and I was working on about 3 or 4 projects. I was, suddenly it was all a bit real, and I was a bit, people kept on asking me to do stuff, which is great. It's flattering, and I suddenly found it sort of difficult to manage. And I said to him, he said, "Hey, you don't have to say yes to everything. You don't have to say no to everything. You just need to say, can I check my calendar and I'll get back to you?" And I know that sounds so simple and obvious, but for someone who was sort of in a bit of a flat spin on that day, it was such great advice, and it allowed me to just to own my time, albeit briefly. And especially in this environment where we are singular units at home, and a lot of people are probably coming to you for stuff, or not. Either way, you are still in control of your calendar, and let that be your sort of bolster. And then to answer my advice is this. What I do is hearts and minds. I do that because it comes naturally. But guess what? It comes naturally to all of us. And even if your chosen role or métier is not necessarily about creating videos or writing stories and so on and so forth, we are all, especially in the live event experience industry, whatever we wish to call it, we are all in the business of storytelling or facilitating storytelling and content sharing. So if you make that your guiding principle, that to ask yourself, is what I'm doing enabling that, then I think you'll find that you're going to be very successful regardless of what you're specifically doing on a day-to-day basis.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Ben. It was such an interesting conversation, and I think some really, really useful, practical, how do we do shows now? How do we think about content advice in there? And we'd love to do some more with you at some stage over the next few weeks if you're up for that.
No, delighted to.
Brilliant. So, just to say as well, we're really keen to get more people involved in this conversation. We've got four lined up for next week already. So there's a lot of people from different areas of the industry. Project directors, health and safety people, talking about kind of some of the COVID planning side of things, and how we start to look at making sure this we build safety back into things as we come back. So there's quite a lot to look forward to next week. But just to say thank you very much again, Ben, and goodbye for now.
Yeah, good luck, everyone. Hang in there, and I look forward to seeing lots of you soon. All the best.
Bye bye.